Sunday, February 23, 2026. The mountains above Tapalpa, Jalisco, Mexico. Before sunrise, Mexican Army Special Forces and National Guard units moved quietly through the hills, armed with intelligence that had taken years to build. Their target, the most powerful drug lord in the world. A man the United States had placed a $15 million bounty on. A man so elusive, only a handful of photos of him existed. A man who had turned a small cartel into a criminal empire spanning 40 countries. His name was Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. The world knew him as El Mencho. To understand El Mencho, you have to understand where he came from. Not from money, not from power, from nothing. July 1966. In the small town of Aguililla, deep in the rugged mountains of Michoacan, one of Mexico's most violent and impoverished states, Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes was born into a family with very little. Aguililla was the kind of place where opportunity was scarce, and the cartels were everywhere. For a young man growing up in that environment, the line between survival and crime was dangerously thin. As a teenager and young adult, Nemesio showed some legitimate ambition. He reportedly worked as a policeman in Tapalpa, Jalisco, a position that gave him his first taste of authority, and perhaps more importantly, his first real understanding of how law enforcement operated. He was a fox learning to think like a hound, but the pull of fast money was too strong. By the late 1980s, Nemesio had left legitimate work behind and made his way north, illegally crossing the border into California. The United States, he hoped, would give him something Mexico never could, and for a brief time it did. He found work, he found community, and he found the drug trade. It didn't take long before his activities caught the attention of American law enforcement. In 1994, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was convicted in California on charges of conspiracy to distribute heroin. He was sentenced to federal prison and served 3 years behind bars in the United States. It was a setback, but for a man like El Mencho, prison was not the end. It was an education. After serving his sentence, he was deported back to Mexico in the early 1990s. But the Nemesio who returned was not the same man who had left. He was harder, more connected, and far more dangerous. A freshly deported man with a U.S. criminal record and no money had two choices: go straight or go deeper. Nemesio went deeper. Back in Mexico in the mid-1990s, Nemesio gravitated toward what he knew: violence and organization. He began building a reputation in the criminal underworld of Jalisco and Michoacan. His background as a former cop gave him a tactical edge. He understood surveillance, police radio codes, and law enforcement patterns. That knowledge made him invaluable to criminal organizations. He first attached himself to the Menchito cartel, also known as the Valencia organization, one of the powerful drug trafficking groups operating out of Michoacan and Jalisco. The Menchito cartel was deeply embedded in the methamphetamine and cocaine trade, and they had connections that stretched from Colombia to the American Southwest. Within the Menchito cartel, Nemesio rose quickly. He was disciplined, ruthless, and loyal. He became a top enforcer, a jefe de sicarios or chief of hitmen. He didn't just order violence. He supervised it, he organized it, he perfected it. The cartel world took notice. His reputation grew so strong that he also crossed paths with the most powerful cartel in Mexico, the Sinaloa cartel, led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Nemesio reportedly served in security and operational roles for the Sinaloa organization, learning from the best while quietly building his own contacts and ambitions. He was a student of the game, One former DEA analyst later described him. He watched how El Chapo built his empire, the logistics, the corruption, the violence, and he filed all of it away for when it was his time. That time came sooner than anyone expected. In 2009, everything changed. The Mexican government arrested Oscar Nava Valencia, the leader of the Menchito cartel. His capture sent shockwaves through the organization, fracturing it into competing factions. It was exactly the kind of power vacuum that ambitious men like Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes had been waiting for. From the smoking ruins of the Menchito cartel, a new organization would emerge. And this time, Nemesio would be at the top. 2009. Mexico was already bleeding. The drug war was consuming entire cities. Thousands were dying. And into that chaos, El Mencho built something the world had never seen before. Around 2009 to 2011, accounts vary slightly, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes co-founded the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Known in Spanish as the Cartel Jalisco New Generation, or CJNG. He built it alongside Eric Valencia Salazar, known as L85, and crucially with the support of his brother-in-law, Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, the head of Los Cuines. A powerful family-based organization from Michoacan that would serve as CJNG's financial and logistical backbone. The name said it all, New Generation. El Mencho wasn't building an old-fashioned cartel. He was building a corporation, a military, an empire. From the beginning, CJNG operated differently from other cartels. While organizations like the Sinaloa cartel were built on decades of tradition and family ties, El Mencho designed CJNG as a franchise model. Regional cells could operate under the CJNG banner, pledging allegiance to El Mencho and paying tribute, while maintaining local control. It was a structure that allowed for explosive growth without requiring El Mencho to micromanage every operation. And grow it did. Within just a few years, CJNG had established a presence across western Mexico, Jalisco, Colima, Veracruz, Nayarit, Michoacan. They pushed into trafficking corridors that connected cocaine supplies from Colombia with the insatiable American market for drugs. They moved cocaine, heroin, and increasingly methamphetamine, which CJNG manufactured domestically, reducing their dependence on Colombian suppliers. But what truly set CJNG apart, and what made El Mencho genuinely terrifying, was his willingness to attack the state itself. Most cartels tried to avoid direct confrontation with the Mexican military. El Mencho embraced it. In 2015, CJNG carried out one of the most audacious attacks in Mexican cartel history, an ambush on a Mexican federal police convoy in Jalisco that left 15 officers dead and 5 wounded. They didn't just fight back, they hunted law enforcement. That same year, CJNG fighters shot down a Mexican military helicopter with a rocket launcher, a military helicopter. This wasn't a cartel anymore. This was a paramilitary force. The FBI was paying close attention. They would later designate CJNG as one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world, not just in Mexico, in the world. He was the most powerful drug lord in Mexico, possibly in the world, and almost nobody had seen his face. By the mid-2010s, El Mencho had become a ghost. While cartel leaders like El Chapo cultivated a kind of outlaw celebrity, giving interviews, appearing in public, even meeting with actors and journalists, El Mencho went the opposite direction. He disappeared, deliberately, methodically, completely. All known photographs of him dated back decades. He never appeared in videos, he never made public statements. He communicated through layers of intermediaries. His operatives didn't know where he slept on any given night. His location was compartmentalized. Only a handful of his most trusted inner circle ever knew where El Mencho actually was at any given moment. This obsessive secrecy was not paranoia. It was strategy. El Mencho had watched what happened to cartel leaders who became too visible. El Chapo had been caught twice, partly because his own fame made him a target. El Mencho would not make that mistake. His health was reportedly a constant concern. Sources indicated El Mencho suffered from severe kidney disease, requiring dialysis, which may have further restricted his movements and made it even harder for authorities to track him through. Patterns of behavior. A man who needs medical treatment has a vulnerability. El Mencho managed that vulnerability with the same ruthlessness he managed everything else. He moved constantly. He used couriers for communication. He rotated safe houses. He trusted virtually no one. The United States raised the bounty on his head multiple times, eventually reaching $15 million by December 2024, and still, for years, no one collected. In an era of cell phone surveillance, satellite tracking, and signals intelligence, El Mencho remained invisible. It was, by any measure, a remarkable achievement. El Chapo smuggled drugs. El Mencho industrialized them. By the late 2010s, CJNG under El Mencho had become what the FBI called Mexico's most powerful trafficking organization, responsible, by DEA estimates, for at least 1/3 of all drugs entering the United States by air and sea. But it was the fentanyl trade that transformed El Mencho from a powerful criminal into something closer to a public health catastrophe. Fentanyl, the synthetic opioid up to 100 times more potent than morphine, had begun flooding the American drug market in the 2010s. CJNG became one of its primary manufacturers and distributors. Unlike heroin, which required poppy cultivation, fentanyl could be synthesized in laboratories from chemical precursors, many of which CJNG sourced from China. El Mencho built production facilities across Mexico, turning Jalisco into a manufacturing hub for a drug that was killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. In 2022, El Mencho was charged in the United States with conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl for importation into the United States. American prosecutors described CJNG as having a direct role in fueling the opioid epidemic devastating communities across the country. But El Mencho was building more than a drug empire. CJNG under his leadership had expanded into virtually every form of serious crime: extortion, kidnapping, human trafficking, migrant smuggling, oil theft from Mexican state pipelines, mineral theft, arms trafficking, and money laundering on a massive scale. The U.S. Treasury Department documented the group's involvement in fuel theft and crude oil smuggling. His innovation with weapons was terrifying. CJNG was a pioneer in using drones armed with explosives, a tactic more associated with military conflicts in the Middle East than with criminal organizations. They installed landmines. They built armored vehicles, crude but effective machines welded together from trucks and steel plating that could withstand small arms fire. They deployed rocket launchers against government forces. In June 2020, CJNG carried out perhaps its most brazen attack, an assassination attempt against Mexico City's Secretary of Public Security, Omar Garcia Harfuch, in the heart of the capital. Using grenades and high-powered rifles, they ambushed his convoy in broad daylight on one of Mexico's most famous avenues. Garcia Harfuch survived barely with 3 bullet wounds, but the message was unmistakable. CJNG would attack anyone, anywhere. By 2019, a former DEA agent told CBS News that El Mencho was the #1 priority for DEA and, frankly, for federal law enforcement in the United States. The CJNG had contacts in over 40 countries from Latin America to Australia, China, and Southeast Asia, according to the U.S. State Department. El Mencho had built not just a cartel, he had built a transnational criminal enterprise that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, anything that had come before it. El Mencho trusted almost no one, but he trusted his family, and one by one the Americans took them. Like many cartel leaders, El Mencho kept his inner circle tightly bound by blood. His wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, sister of his key financial partner Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, was deeply embedded in CJNG operations. She was detained in Mexico on financial crime allegations, though later released. Her brother Abigail, the financial architect of the entire operation, was eventually extradited to the United States. His son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, was groomed to follow his father's path. El Menchito rose to become a powerful figure within CJNG in his own right. Reportedly involved in ordering killings and personally overseeing the early fentanyl smuggling operations into the United States. In March 2025, a U.S. federal court sentenced El Menchito to life in prison plus 30 years. Former U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said at sentencing that El Menchito had used murder, kidnapping, and torture to build the cartel into a self-described empire. His daughter was also arrested and imprisoned. His brother-in-law Abigail was extradited and convicted. His longtime associate and CJNG co-founder, Eric L85 Valencia Salazar, was taken into U.S. custody in February 2025 as part of a massive operation that swept up 29 wanted cartel leaders. Another associate, Antonio Tony Montana Oseguera Cervantes, was also arrested. A money launderer connected to the cartel, Christian El Guacho Gutierrez Ochoa, received an 11-year sentence in the U.S. in 2025. One by one, the pillars of El Mencho's organization were being dismantled. His son in prison for life, his co-founder in custody, his financial network being dismantled, his family incarcerated. El Mencho watched all of this happen from the shadows, and he kept hiding. But hiding came with a price. Every trusted lieutenant who was arrested was a potential intelligence source. Every arrest tightened the noose, and the Americans and Mexicans, working together more closely than ever, were getting closer. By 2025, El Mencho was the last man standing, and the whole world was looking for him. In December 2024, the United States State Department raised the bounty for El Mencho's arrest or conviction to $15 million, $1 of the highest rewards ever offered for a fugitive in history. The poster described him simply as a fugitive. He had been indicted multiple times in the United States since 2017. The message was clear: America wanted El Mencho. Then, in January 2025, Donald Trump returned to the White House and immediately made the cartels a centerpiece of his national security agenda. In February 2025, the Trump administration took an extraordinary step, officially designating CJNG and 7 other Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. It was the same designation applied to groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The implications were significant. It opened the door for U.S. military involvement in targeting cartel operations. It allowed financial institutions to be held liable for any connections to CJNG. It put El Mencho in the same legal category as the world's most wanted terrorists. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum found herself under enormous pressure. Trump had imposed tariffs on Mexican goods and was threatening further economic pain unless Mexico delivered results on the cartel front. Mexico sent thousands of National Guard and Army troops to the U.S. border. It extradited dozens of cartel members to American custody. And it quietly began the most intensive intelligence operation in Mexican history to locate El Mencho. By early 2026, the operation was entering its final phase. Multiple senior CJNG figures had already been arrested or killed. The cartel's financial networks were under sustained attack. U.S. intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, satellite surveillance was flowing to Mexican counterparts at unprecedented levels. The walls were closing in on El Mencho from every direction. He was sick. He was isolated. His family was imprisoned. His organization was under attack. And for the first time in years, his location was known. Mexican military intelligence had pinpointed a location in Tapalpa, a small, picturesque mountain town about 2 hours southwest of Guadalajara. El Mencho, despite all his precautions, had been tracked there. The operation was authorized. The teams were assembled. The clock was running out. Sunday, February 23, 2026. Before the sun rose over Tapalpa, Jalisco, history was made. In the early hours of Sunday, February 23, 2026, Mexican Army Special Forces and units of the National Guard's Immediate Reaction Special Force converged on a location in Tapalpa, Jalisco. They moved with precision. The Mexican Air Force provided overhead support. American intelligence had provided what Mexico's Defense Secretariat later described as complementary information, the kind of intelligence that could only come from years of surveillance and penetration of CJNG's communications. The operation's stated goal was to capture El Margaret, but El Mencho's guards were not going to allow that without a fight. As Mexican forces moved in, CJNG operatives at the location opened fire. A fierce firefight erupted in the Jalisco mountains. 4 CJNG members were killed immediately in the exchange. 3 more, including El Mencho himself, were critically wounded. 3 Mexican soldiers were also injured in the battle. 2 CJNG members were captured alive, and the troops seized armored vehicles, rocket launchers, and other heavy weapons from the compound. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, was gravely wounded during the raid. Mexican authorities loaded him onto a helicopter and began flying him to Mexico City, but he never arrived. He died during the transfer. Mexico's Ministry of Defense released an official statement confirming his death. The statement described the operation, the firefight, and the aftermath. It was clinical. Matter of fact, but the weight of what it meant was anything but. Mexico City, thousands of kilometers away, was stunned. Then slowly, the news began to spread. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau was among the first American officials to respond publicly. He confirmed the cartel leader's death on X, formerly Twitter, calling El Mencho one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins and declaring, "This is a great development for Mexico, the U.S., Latin America, and the world. The good guys are stronger than the bad guys." White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the United States had provided intelligence support to the Mexican government for the operation. "President Trump has been very clear," she said. "The United States will ensure narco-terrorists sending deadly drugs to our homeland are forced to face the wrath of justice they have long deserved." For Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, who had been under enormous pressure from the Trump administration, it was the ultimate proof of results. She applauded Mexican security forces and called for calm. Her defense secretary, General Ricardo Trevilla Trillo, described a very violent clash during the ground operation before El Mencho was taken. The most wanted drug lord in the world was dead. He was 59 years old. El Mencho was dead, but the cartel he built was very much alive. and it wanted the world to know. Within hours of El Mencho's death being confirmed, CJNG unleashed one of the most dramatic displays of cartel power in Mexican history. Across the country, cartel members set vehicles ablaze and used burning cars to block roads. The blockade spread across nearly a dozen, then 20 Mexican states. Smoke billowed into the skies above Guadalajara, Jalisco's capital, which was turned into a ghost town as civilians locked their doors and stayed home. It was simultaneously a show of grief, rage, and power. CJNG was telling Mexico and the world that the organization had survived, that the cartel was still there. That killing El Mencho had not killed the CJNG. The violence rippled outward in ways that affected ordinary people far beyond Mexico's drug war. Major airlines, including Southwest, canceled flights in and out of Puerto Vallarta, stranding hundreds of American tourists. The U.S. State Department issued urgent security alerts warning Americans in Jalisco, Tamaulipas, Michoacan, Guerrero, Nuevo Leon, Baja California, Sinaloa, Quintana Roo, and other states to shelter in place. The State Department's 24/7 crisis hotline was flooded with hundreds of calls from frightened U.S. citizens. Several Mexican states canceled school on Monday. Local and foreign governments issued warnings. International airlines suspended operations at multiple Mexican airports. The FIFA World Cup, scheduled to be partially hosted in Guadalajara, loomed in the background, adding to international concern about stability. By the time Mexican authorities declared most of the more than 250 cartel roadblocks cleared, a grim toll was emerging. 25 members of Mexico's National Guard, a prison guard, and a government official had been killed in the clashes. A woman was also dead. 30 cartel members were reported killed in the fighting across the country. The scenes shocked the world, but they did not shock Mexico's security analysts. They had warned of exactly this moment for years. El Mencho is gone, but the empire he built spans 40 countries, earns billions of dollars a year, and manufactures the drug that is killing more Americans than any war in U.S. history. What happens now? Analysts were quick to point out the uncomfortable truth. Killing a cartel's leader rarely kills the cartel. When the Mexican government arrested El Chapo in 2016, and he was subsequently extradited to the United States, the Sinaloa cartel survived. It fractured, yes. It went to war with itself. Thousands died in the power struggle, but it endured. The situation with CJNG may be even more complex. El Mencho had built his organization specifically to survive without him. The franchise model, with semi-autonomous regional cells operating under the CJNG brand, meant that no single arrest or killing could decapitate the entire organization. When the head falls, the body keeps moving, but El Mencho's death leaves a dangerous vacuum at the top. His son is serving life in prison. His brother is imprisoned in the United States. His co-founder is in custody. His daughter is arrested. His closest financial partner is extradited. There is no obvious, clear, universally accepted successor. We could now see different regional bosses in the cartel start disputing for power. Al Jazeera's John Homan reported from Mexico City. We saw this happen before. When El Chapo was arrested, it eventually sparked a civil war between the different Sinaloa factions. The rival Sinaloa cartel, already tearing itself apart in its own internal power struggle, was watching with great interest. The territories CJNG had carved out over 15 years of brutal expansion were now potentially up for grabs. The worst-case scenario for Mexico was a multi-cartel war over those territories. David Mora, a senior analyst for Mexico at the International Crisis Group, noted that under President Sheinbaum, the Mexican army had become way more confrontational. Combative against criminal groups, a signal to the United States that Mexico was serious about results. El Mencho's killing was the ultimate proof, but there was a wider question, too, one that went beyond Mexico. El Mencho's CJNG had been the primary force driving fentanyl into the United States. The drug was manufactured in Mexican labs, often using precursors from China, and transported across the border in quantities large enough to be the leading cause of overdose deaths in America. With CJNG in chaos, would fentanyl production slow, or would it simply shift to other organizations, other hands, other routes? History suggested the second option. The drug trade is not a corporation that can be shut down by arresting its CEO. It is a market, and markets find new suppliers. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes was born in poverty in the mountains of Michoacan. He grew up in a world where the cartels were not just criminals, they were the only power that mattered. He became a cop, then a criminal, then a capo. And then something unprecedented. The most powerful, most elusive, most dangerous drug lord the modern world had ever seen. For nearly 2 decades, he built an organization that the FBI called one of the 5 most dangerous criminal groups on Earth. He manufactured and distributed the drugs that fueled an epidemic killing tens of thousands of people a year. He attacked soldiers, shot down helicopters, assassinated police chiefs, and ordered the deaths of countless rivals, informants, and anyone who stood in his way. He lived like a ghost and ran an empire. And on February 23, 2026, in the mountains above a small Jalisco town, in a firefight with Mexican Army Special Forces supported by American intelligence, the ghost finally became a corpse. He was 59 years old. He died without ever standing trial. He never answered for the lives destroyed by the drugs his cartel sold. He never answered for the people his killers murdered. He died as he had lived, a fugitive. The cartel he built still exists. The fentanyl still flows. The violence has not stopped. In some ways, his death may have made things worse. But tonight, in Mexico City, in Washington, D.C., and in the families of those lost to cartel violence and drug overdoses, there is at least this: the knowledge that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how well hidden, no matter how feared, runs forever. And that is the story of El Mencho, the man who built Mexico's most powerful cartel, evaded capture for decades, and met his end in the mountains of Jalisco. If you made it this far, thank you, genuinely. This story took real research, real work, and real respect for the gravity of the lives involved on all sides of this tragedy. If you found this documentary valuable, please hit the like button. Subscribe to Crime Case Vault, and share this video with someone who wants to understand how the drug war really works, not from the news, not from a movie, but from the facts. Drop a comment below. Do you think El Mencho's death will change anything? Will CJNG survive? Will the fentanyl crisis ease? I want to hear your take. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, truth is always stranger than fiction.